All right, everybody. Good Wednesday morning. It's time for the next phase of Seahawks roster building, and this one should be done pretty quickly. Uh, it it's expected generally that teams build their practice squad rosters pretty quickly after the initial cutdown date. So by the time you're watching this video, we may already know some, if not most, of the Seahawks practice squad players. It's possible that even before this video gets up, we may already be hearing trickles of who made the practice squad. So I'm going to go ahead and work with the information that I have right now, which is a little bit before we open for business on Wednesday, meaning that I don't know who any of the practice squatters are, and I don't know which previous Seahawks players got picked up by other teams to be put on their 53-man rosters. Okay, so here we have our 53-man roster on the left side of the screen. I threw in Geno Atkins because I really think we're going to pick him up, but he's in purple to mark the fact that he's just a prediction. And if you just remove him from the pile, you have yourself a 53-man roster. Not necessarily the 53-man roster that we are going to end up with when we open the season against the Colts. I think a lot of teams are going to be shifting a little bit before the actual games start, but there's a decent bet that what you see is what you get in almost all cases. So now let's turn our focus to the practice squad, and there is a lot of fluidity with this practice squad because there are definitely a lot of players that I think this team really wants on their practice squad, and some of those players that they want they won't be able to get because another team's going to come in and say, hey, we want you on our 53 man. And with very rare exception, any prospective NFL player would much rather be on a 53 man than a practice squad. So if we try to put a player on our practice squad and a team like Jacksonville comes in and is like, hey, we want you to be our chief backup, then there's no choice to make. There's no decision. So with that in mind, we're going to take a look at what I believe are our top practice squad candidates, and then we're going to take a look at some potential alternates. So in blue here, we have the guys that I think that we would like to put on our practice squad if nobody gets snatched. So in a perfect world, in a day or two, this will be our practice squad if I had to guess what the team is thinking. Now, obviously, we don't live in a perfect world. Some of these guys are going to get poached unless we're just the luckiest team ever. There are a lot of really bad teams out there, like the Jaguars, the Jets, possibly the Eagles, I think are going to be that bad this year. And they're going to take a look at the better teams in the league, the teams that are actually expected to be good this year, and say, hey, they can't keep all their talent on their 53 man. Let's go get some of their talent that they have to shed. All right. So let's go position by position on this list and see how close I end up being. All right, quarterback. This is a little odd, right? Because I truly believe that Sean Mannion will be our practice squad quarterback. He is currently the active roster third string quarterback. But there's no point for us in carrying three quarterbacks, and we can't afford to. I don't think this is even really a difficult decision to make. Mannion, I fully expect to be released, and assuming he makes it through waivers, ends up on the practice squad. In fact, I think you may see Mannion get cut to make room for Geno Atkins in the next handful of days. Now, if for some reason we decided we really want to keep three quarterbacks, or if Mannion gets picked up after getting cut, which, yeah, right, there's one guy who stands out to me as a potential practice squad quarterback who I think we could go after. So my first practice squad alternate is Brent Hundley. You may remember we traded for him once upon a time, and clearly there's not much of a future for him in the NFL in terms of actually playing in games. The Colts recently cut him, and they have quarterback problems right now. They're battling a bunch of injuries. Ellinger got hurt. We know about Wentz, and he still couldn't get a job. So, yeah, if you can get Brent Hundley on the practice squad, that would be my next alternate. After that, you're looking at guys like Magoo and Etling that there's just not much there. All right, so running back, our first man up would be Johnson, who I believe this team really wants to keep around. I don't think we're going to be able to. I have a feeling somebody is going to swoop in and say, we want to make you our fourth string active roster running back. If we get lucky, great. If not, then the only other guy who really comes to mind is BJ Emmons, who we released a few weeks ago, and then he signed with another team for the preseason, and I believe he got cut again, so we could just bring him back. However, if not him, then you're down to guys like Patrick Carr, who was here last year but has no real upside. Wide receiver is probably the most active position for us when it comes to the practice squad. We have a lot of guys who I think we'd really like to keep around, and at least one of the guys is unlikely to make it through waivers. So we got Penny Hart, of course. I think he's our number one priority because he has a future on this team. I think that Penny Hart has a future on this team either as a receiver, a special teamer, or both. So he hasn't done a lot in the NFL, and he wasn't a big-time college player, so you should be able to sneak him on, but we'll see. Cade Johnson, he got so much positive press after his college career. People thought he was going to be drafted. He ended up slipping through the cracks. He ended up being one of our biggest UDFA gets. Hard for me to believe that he makes it through waivers. But if he does, then this team will be very excited to put him on the practice squad. And then you have Aaron Fuller, who I think had a pretty good preseason and seems like he had a pretty decent camp. Good enough to be a practice squatter, but not really good enough to be on anybody's active roster in all likelihood. And Cody Thompson, another training camp warrior, another guy who supposedly did great work this offseason. No room for him on the active roster, obviously. So those would be 4 guys. I know it's a lot of roster spots to use on receivers, but when you take a look at the fact that we only have 4 active roster receivers, it kind of makes sense. Now, if and when one or more of these guys ends up getting picked up by another team, I really do suspect Cade Johnson will get picked up by somebody. Connor Weddington is still there, and we know that we like him. We gave him a signing bonus. We brought him in off of UDFA. It seemed like there was a plan to use him, and it never manifested in the preseason, but I still think we like him. So definitely a good candidate to bring in as an alternate, but these are my top 4. All right, tight end, Tyler Mabry. I feel like this one's kind of obvious, right? He was on the practice squad last year. He's never done anything to turn anybody's heads. Nobody's going to want to bring him on their 53-man, but he has a little bit of familiarity, and it just makes a lot of sense to go ahead and bring him in on the practice squad. So he's there, and then you've got Cam Sutton, who was utilized a little bit in the preseason, and he lined up creatively, so there might be a little something there. But if Mabry can't slip through the cracks, or there's something there we don't like, then Cam Sutton's the next man up, obviously. And, yeah, there was Ian Bunting, I guess, would be the second alternate, but I seriously doubt we get that far. So that gets us through the quote-unquote skill positions at offense. So now let's try to muddle through the offensive line, and things are going to get a little confusing here, so bear with me. All right, so let's look at the tackle position collectively. Because when you're talking about practice squatters, you want to get guys who you expect to be able to be at least flexible enough to move from side to side in practice, because very different from a game, right? If you have a practice squad tackle, you expect him to be able to play both sides competently in a practice environment. So Dwayne Brown, Stone Forsythe, Jake Curhan, Brandon Shell, Cedric Ogbuehi are the active roster guys. Tommy Champion, I think, is the chief candidate to be the practice squad tackle. He's been on the practice squad before. There's some reason to believe that we think he has a future as an eventual active roster player. I don't know if it'll ever manifest, but I believe he'll continue to be on the practice squad. If Tommy Champion isn't it, or if he gets picked up, then it's Greg Island. Greg Island probably gets the call up. He's a UDFA, very unlikely to get picked up by anybody, but there is some appealing stuff there, I think, in terms of his raw talent. So he would get the call up in the event of Tommy Champion not being an option. Guard. So we got 4 guards on the active roster, and the practice squatter that I have is Jordan Simmons, which is, it's not unheard of for a player to sign a free agency contract and then end up on the practice squad, but it feels a little bit weird because Jordan Simmons has played snaps in the NFL and had credible NFL moments. It's not like Sean Mannion, who never really had a chance because he has a noodle arm and has just a very limited skill set. Jordan Simmons looked genuinely good in 2018, and he was passable last year, so it would be a little weird for him to end up on the practice squad, but I don't think anybody's going to really want him, and I think he's going to end up back in Seattle. Now, if he thinks the practice squad is beneath him or he gets picked up, then the only other guy I can think of is Jared Hawker, who was on the team for the preseason and training camp. I kind of liked what I saw when we picked him up out of UDFA, but he didn't really put himself on the map much in preseason, so I don't know what he really is, but it's a candidate, and that's guard. So now we go to the ever-important center position. All eyes on this position. Pierre-Olivier Lestage got cut, very likely to make it through waivers, and will probably end up back in Seattle on the practice squad as the PS center. Now, I know some teams were interested in him when we picked him up. We were more interested than anybody else, but I believe some other teams were as well. If Lestage gets picked up by another team, then it's probably Brad Lundblade, who actually played pretty well against the Broncos in the preseason. And honestly, I don't know if he looked that much worse than Kyle Fuller, if you want to go there. So Brad Lundblade would be a decent second option, but I think it's going to be Lestage. I'm pretty sure he slips through the waivers. Okay, defense. Let's start with the defensive line. Defensive end, I don't have any practice squad candidates or alternates, and it's pretty obvious why, right? We have 5 defensive ends on the active roster, and that doesn't include LJ Collier, who can play some 5-tech and probably well, so we are just loaded there. We don't really need anybody on the practice squad to be able to call up in the event of an emergency right now. And I can't think of anybody other than Tchangam who we would consider as an alternate if a bunch of our potential practice squatters get poached. If something happens with one of our defensive ends, we should have the depth to take care of it because, by the way, Darrell Taylor can play Leo as well and probably well even if everyone's healthy. So there are a lot of defensive end snaps to go around, but we have a ton of players to mop them up. So yeah, nothing there. Defensive tackle, I do have a couple of guys who I think will make the practice squad. I have Gerard Hewitt and Robert Kimdichie. Kimdichie's an interesting case. He was out of the league last year, and it looked like his career was over. So it's kind of hard to believe that any team out there would be like, oh, the Seahawks cut that dude. Let's go get that dude right now. We got to get him over here and put him on our active roster. That guy's awesome. Seems like that would have happened well before we picked him up if somebody really liked him. And it's not like he put any positive tape out there in the preseason because he was hurt. So I think we can get Kimdichie back on the practice squad if Kimdichie is willing to be on a practice squad. And at this point in his life, I expect he will. Hewitt, on the other hand, made some preseason plays, so it's possible somebody gets him. If that happens, then Miles Adams is really the only other guy you could go get. He didn't leave an impression on me in the preseason, but he would be a decent next man up. He at least played some and has a little bit of experience in this defense. So, yeah, that would be the defensive tackle spot. Let's go to linebacker. Middle linebacker, we have Bobby Wagner with Cody Barton backing him up. And John Radigan is the first practice squatter, I think, at the position. I seriously doubt anyone's going to pick him up, although he did play really well against the Chargers, so we can't rule it out. So John Radigan would be my first pick for a practice squad linebacker. Will, we have Brooks and Ballore, and then Sam, we have Darrell Taylor. Donkor is the other practice squad linebacker, and he's automatic because he has a free roster spot. We know he's going to be there because it doesn't cost us anything to put him there. If Radigan were to get picked up or have to go serve his terms in the Army, then Lakiem Williams would be called up, I think. And that's not bad because he actually kind of impressed me in the preseason. So he would be replacing Radigan if Radigan can't go, but otherwise I expect John Radigan to continue his career on our practice squad. Cornerback. We have 5 on the active roster once Sidney Jones gets over here, and I have us having 2 on the practice squad. Gavin Heslop, who is the guy I think we really want to make sure we keep because he actually had a pretty good preseason and has some history with this team. He's been around for at least a year, maybe more. So I think that he's somebody that we think might have a future in the NFL, and if nothing else, is somebody who seems to be able to hold his own in training camp. And the other guy would be John Reed. We traded for him. I know we ended up not actually doing the trade because we cut him. Now that we cut him, it's almost impossible for Houston to ever see that 7th round pick. But John Reed, clearly there's something there that appeals to us, and I don't think he did anything good or bad in the Chargers preseason game, but I know he was impressing a little bit in camp, in practice. So I think we're going to try to bring him back. If one of them gets picked up, Sunderland is the only guy left, really. I didn't really notice Sunderland in the preseason. I didn't hear about him in camp, but he was able to stick around through the first 2 rounds of cuts, so that has to represent some level of competency that the team ascribes to him, I guess. Safety, only really one thing to pay attention to here. Asari Crosswell, who made 1 or 2 plays that made me go, oh, it's Crosswell in the preseason, and supposedly did some decent things in camp. Seems like we like him, and seems like that we like him enough to bring him on as a practice squatter. If it turns out we can't, then the only other guy is Joshua Moon, who didn't leave much of an impression on me from the preseason, but I did notice him once or twice making a play that made me think this guy at least knows how to put his pants on. And sometimes when you're a practice squatter in the NFL, you don't need to do too much more than that. So, yeah. These light blue cells get us to 17 practice squatters, which is our maximum with Donkor included. So in a perfect world, when we get our practice squad set, it'll look like this. But more than likely, we're going to have to use some alternates, and these are the alternates that I think will be first in line. And that's really all that can be said. We're pretty familiar with a lot of these names. You've obviously seen them on my charts for months now because I've wrapped them in with the 53-man. So now that we had the 53-man set, I just wanted to go over one more time who I expect us to try to bring back. So let me know what you think down below. We should know about the practice squad later today, maybe tomorrow. It shouldn't take very long at all for us to find out who we're actually able to retain. But the priorities for me are obviously Penny Hart and Cade Johnson, and I would actually say Gavin Heslop and Robert Kimdichie as well. Those are 4 guys who I think could play on the actual team in the actual games at some point in 2021 and play an important role. Everyone else, see in 2022 maybe. But those 4 guys, I'm watching for it. All right, see you guys later today. Peace out, Go Hawks. Let's put this practice squad together, baby.